Now, we've done a few loops this morning, and we didn't do, I think Sun wasn't here when we did those, so we'll do a couple with her, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on loops. There's just a lot of different variation of loops, and the way I looked at this is that just seeing a structure in place of how the loop capabilities work is what I wanted to show you. And then you can choose the various variations that you might need for the various purposes. The for loops are more for sort of a counter type thing. So you're going to loop for a specific interval. In this case, we're going to count for a counter from 1 to 10. So that's just a specific set of sequences. A lot of times I don't use the for loops, I use the do loops because I'm dealing with cell manipulation. So I'm actually going out and looking at the cells, and there's a nice little do loop for that that works really well, which is until there's a blank. So it's just going to keep looping until it encounters some condition that it can actually go back and look at. So for loops, choose a for loop here, just to show you that this one's probably good right here, this first one. It looks like we're going to open this file called looping, and then we'll go through and look at this code here. So it looks like we create a counter, integer, and then looks like we select a certain cell, and then we're going to go to the active cell, and it looks like they're going to put the counter in there, it looks like. But then it's going to count from 1 to 10. And then it's simply going to go through and just go through it 10 times and then stop. And so usually that's when you have a specific number you want to count or the specific things you want to iterate to, then a for loop works really well for that. But when you talk about actually looking at cells, there's the do loop that works really well, the do and tell. So let's just copy this code out. We're going to open up the thing called looping. It looks like the code has it all taken care of. So we'll come over to Excel and open up the file called looping. We'll just run through a few of these, like I said. So here it's just going to loop through this thing. It looks like it's going to go to A5 right here. It's going to start here, it looks like. It's going to put the counter in there. Let's go to our DB. I will come down to my looping sheet. So there it is. I'll add a module. And I'll just paste my code in. So it looks like we are going to put this counter, looks like, in the cell A5, and then we're going to count 10 times. That's all we're going to do. So I could just run that just the way it is right now. There's my for loop. Put the word counter in there, and it's going to count it 10 times. So it looks like it's going to offset it by the number of the counter number. And then it's going to go to the next counter. See, it's just putting those numbers in there, as you can see. It's going to count 10 times, and then it's going to drop out. That's essentially what a for loop does. Is sometimes if you know exactly how many lines you need to go, then you can specify. You can use that as an input variable. I want to loop 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, and then it'll continue looping through that. But we don't know where to stop. That's the problem. And that's why I said the do loops work really nice, because it knows where to stop when it encounters some sort of condition in the cell itself. Right, so that's the for loop. And you can use that in different ways. Of course, here we're going to, looks like we're going to say, I want to go for 1, 2, and then I have to say, well, where am I going to go down to? So it looks like it's going to roll down to the end of the database, started at E6, and then it says that's how long it's going to go. And it has a -5 in here because there's 5 cells in the beginning and we need to subtract to it. So this is identifying the bottom of the rows and simply saying, count that number of times and then stop. So we sort of predefine how many times we're going to iterate through the system. And like I said, there's other ways to do that too, but this is one way. And this -5, some people are confused about this -5, but That's simply just that there's 5 cells. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's just 5 up here. Subtract those 5, and these are the number of cells on the side here. So find out what row it's on, and then subtract it by 5, because that's how many times I'm gonna scale down through this. Another for loop, pretty straightforward, 1 to 10. It looks at the debug in terms of the information screen for the. Then here's a step by 2. So it's going to go 1 through 10, but every other one it's going to skip 2 each time. So it's going to go to 1, 3, 5, 7, on and on. And I think these are all pretty straightforward once you understand one for loop. This is going to step by -1. That means it's going to count backwards. So it's going to go from 10 to 1, and then it's going to, so another variation of this. This one here is this is looking at a little bit differently. This is looking at this single cells array, and it's actually going through and counting it for each cell in the list. So it actually pulls this data out, and it comes up with a list of cells that it wants to, and it's actually looking through those cells. So it's just a different way of doing it. I think it's easier just to go straight to Excel and do it rather than using this variable, but that could work. Here's another for loop, 1 to 10, and it does some things there. Same thing. Here's another for loop that actually goes through from 1 to x, which is, the x is defined as a variable defining where the end is. So it knows how many times to iterate to that end. And then this one here is a for loop that is going to a specific range for each range in the range name. Pretty straightforward. So the do loops are what I use the most, because the nice one about this one is this until feature. And the second code is probably a little better, actually. So this is a little easier to use. So this is do until the active cell is equal to null. And so it's going to keep looking down until it encounters a null value, and then it's going to stop. It's as simple as that. And this is what we would use to actually just look at every cell to see what's going on. If we want to put it at the bottom of the cell or something like that. You can use the XL down to go to the bottom of the list if that's what you're trying to do. But if you're trying to look at the information to determine what's out there, then you can use the do loop and just keep going until you encounter a blank cell at the bottom, and then it will go out from there. So it looks like we're offsetting by 1, and we're selecting it, and then we're just looping through it this way. So what we could look for is we could actually do a counter to count maybe the number of cells that meet a certain criteria. Okay, so let's try that. So let's take this do loop here. Let's copy it over. We'll make some changes to it. Go over to our looping screen here, and we'll sort of make up an example here. So this case is our loop. This time what I want to do, though, is I want to change it so you'll just take the code and you'll just sort of adjust it to fit your needs. But the basic structure here is I want to continue going as long as there's information here. So in this case, what I want to do is maybe I'm going to create a counter, and I want to count the number of records that meet one of these criteria. So you can simply say if it's 4, I want to know how many 4s are out there. And so I can create a counter, and every time it encounters a 4, then it's going to add that to the counter list. All right, so let's go over to here, and basic structure is we're going to start at cell, I'll say range, dot, we're going to select cells F6, that's going to be our starting point, dot select. We're going to start by selecting that cell range first, and then we're going to go look through this, and we're going to keep going. We're going to drop down one each time and look at each cell, of course, but we also want to set up a counter in here. So we can say our counter, we'll say dim as counter, I should say dim counter as integer. So that creates a little counter. And so we're just going to add 1 to that counter every time it finds one of those records. And then when we're finished, we're going to offset by 1. And so here we're going to simply go to each one, and we're going to say if the active cell is equal to 4, then they're going to counter plus 1. So we could set the counter to 0 up here, but the default is 0. So I can say that, so we have an if statement here. If the active cell value is equal to 4, then we want to count it. Counter equals plus. Then we can say that end if. So we can simply say, and this is something that Sun, we did if statements when you weren't here this morning, but I think we'll go back and review these a little later for you. But you can see that all the if statement says, it says that if this value is equal to 4, then we want to set the counter and tell me how many information I have here. And then close it. And that's all I want to look for, is just if it's 4. And then we want to offset it down, and then we're going to look at it again. But if it's blank, then we want to drop out. Now at the bottom here, we're going to say a message box, MSG box, and we're going to put in our counter. That's all we're going to do. Is we're just going to go through it and look through the list. And this is something that I have done before, things like this, where I wanted to look at the entire database and looking for some specific things or issues or problems, maybe blank cells or blank records or something like this. And so I can just run my program on it. It will come back and give me statistics and tell me, oh yeah, there's 5 blank records found or 2 blank records found or something like that, just to get a kind of a status of where I need to do some work. So if we come up here, it's going to start off in 6, as you can see. It's going to select F6, which it just did. Then we're going to go through the loop, and it's going to continue to loop through this until it encounters a blank spot. So then it says, okay, if it's equal to 4, which it's not, so it's going to jump over the counter and come back, and now it's going to offset by 1. It's going to loop back, so it's going to continue to go through this. Here's a 4 coming up. So here's my 4, and then it says, okay, if it's 4, then set the counter to 1. So it's going to add 1 to it now, and then it simply comes up and continues to drop through it. So there's another 4, so it added a second one in there, and then it just continues to look at each cell, and then when it's finished, it will find that blank cell at the very bottom, and it should actually go through and find that last 4 at the very bottom there too. So I'm just going to keep pressing F8 to kind of go through it so I can slow down towards the end here. And so there's my last 4. It's 4, so it's going to count it. Now it's going to come back and it's going to loop back. And it says, okay, if it's equal to 0, which it is, it should drop out after the loop, which it did. And then it says, tell me how many 4s are out there. And it says there's 5. So that's basically all it does. And you can use that to search through stuff, and whatever variation you use, there's several variations out there, of course. And this is probably a pretty standard one that I use quite a bit if I'm looking through for information. But there's different styles out here. This one here does the until at the end. So if you find that you're going through the looping and all of a sudden it's grabbing one piece of information more than it should, then you can maybe do the until at the end of the loop rather than at the beginning of the loop. So that's another style you could use if it seems to be grabbing that bad record. Now this is a do loop. That's just a do loop itself. This is a do while loop. So this one simply says do while a certain thing is active. So as long as it's not equal to blank, then keep doing it. And so you're saying do this while this condition is true. But you can even have that say continue doing this while until you encounter some situation. And then you can offset it. So very similar type thing, but you're just using this do while capability. And the reason why I touched on all of these is because code, people use different types of code for different purposes. And if you have to go back and read some code, you might not understand that you can put this code at the end of the loop versus the beginning of the loop. And that's why I wanted to make sure I put these in here so you know that it's possible. And if you have a situation, we can do that. So this here says, what are we doing? Here's my loop. So I'm looping at the bottom, it looks like. No, I'm not looping at the bottom. I'm just telling it to continue looping. Don't give it any condition at all. But in here, I put an exit do. So there's a little variation of this, which just simply says, okay, well, just keep going until I encounter a problem, and then I'm going to exit out at that point. So I can jump out of the middle of the do loop when I encounter that there's a space that I run into. So that might work too. So that may be one way you're going to do that is whenever you encounter that error condition or that situation, to just jump out. Okay? And looks like we're doing some counting in here too. This one here is a do loop. It's at the end here. So that's kind of another slightly different variation. This one here is what are we doing here? So we're doing, it doesn't even look like a do loop at all, does it? Oh, it's kind of looping, but it's returning back, see it? So it's basically saying that once I finish a piece, go back to the top, and then keep jumping back this way. So you're looping without a do loop. You're just using a reference to a field this way, and you're just saying go back there and jump to the top. So this says go to top, so it jumps back up here, and then it comes down and does this, and it says, oh, here it is. Here, I found it there. Jump to the top. So it keeps doing that until it encounters this condition, and then it says jump out. So it's a loop without a loop or a loop structure. And a lot of programmers don't use this kind of capability. They like using the do loop because it has a logical structure associated with it. Right, so there's that one. Now the while when it's just a variation of these that I don't really use it very much. I put it in gray because I don't really use it, but I have seen code that use this while when capability. And once just so you know that while when is out there, and it is, some people do use it. So you simply say while, as you can see, while, and then the when is the end here. So you just say keep going while this is true. As long as this is true, then keep going. And then once it's not true, then drop out. And that's really all it does. So these loop structures, like I said, you're going to probably pick a couple, one or two, and kind of stick with it. And those are the ones you might use on a regular basis. So just pick one. I use the do loop a lot, but either one, whichever one works fine. Okay, so this here is interesting. Is this the one I did here? This is pivot with blanks. Okay, this is an interesting one. So this is a little exercise we can walk through to kind of get our hands on it. It looks like we're going to go to pivot with blanks. So I'm going to open up, file open. This is something I kind of created with blanks. Somebody asked me this one time in class. They said, well, I got this database, and I want to keep going to the end of the information. But the problem, I do have blanks in the middle in here. So how do we overcome that? Because generally, if you say go to the end where it's blank, then stop. So in this case, we can simply say, well, if it's blank, well, then keep looking. But if it's two blanks, then stop. So it won't stop at a one blank, but it will stop when there's two blanks. So you think, well, what if there's two blanks? Well, then you say, stop when there's three blanks, or four blanks, or five blanks. Whatever logic you feel you need to do to force it to stop. So this is a problem somebody in the class had some information like this, and they wanted to loop through it, but they wanted to skip over these blanks is what they wanted to do. So we'll go through and, or maybe what we can do is we could actually go through and delete the blanks. So if this record is blank, then we can delete it and then continue looping. So like this. Let me see if that's what I said over here. It says loop structure, each row starts the blank rows, then delete the blank row. Hint, there's only one blank row. Therefore, if you have two blank rows, you're through the database. Okay, so that's it. So we're going to loop through it, and then we're going to, and once we encounter two blanks, then we will stop. Otherwise, we're going to delete and move on. So there's a couple commands we need to be aware of. One is the delete command. So if you say, we can't delete the row by deleting the cell, we have to actually identify the row number. So we have to simply say delete, or you have to select the row possibly and then delete it that way. So what we can do is we can run through it and loop through it this way. If you encounter a blank cell, then we need to select the whole row like this and then delete it this way. So we're going to use there's a row command, and you specify the row, and then you would delete the row. So maybe we should go back and look at that. So let's go back and look at some of those commands first before so you can see where those are. And we could go down to the reference too. I happen to know where they are, I think. But down in this area where we talked about, see, here's the column and row commands here. And I think this is where the delete is up here. So right in this area. So let's go to this one first. Your active cell, value property, copies, and select method. Here's a delete method here. So this would be, you'd select the cells this way and then press the delete. But we can't do that. We have to select the whole row. So we have to use this delete command to do this. But then down here, there is a column and row command. So this is a column. So we have to say column, whatever row we're on. This could be the active cell. We can put maybe an active cell in here and delete that way. So see here we said test it, add the delete there. So we're going to simply say columns E to E, and then you can delete it. You can say select it or delete it here. So we're going to use a combination of this command and the delete command to delete that row if it's blank. Let's go back and see if we can't get that to work. So we're going to come over to our new file, which is our pivot blanks data module. And we're going to sub, should be delete blanks. And we're going to start in cells A5. So we're going to say range dot A5 dot select. That's our first step. We're going to select range A5. So we're going to start in this cell here, and then we're going to loop through it until we encounter a blank or two blanks. So I can say do until the active cell is, till the active cell, and then what I want to say, till the active cell is dot value is equal to blank, right? But I don't want to delete it. I have to also check to see if the next cell is blank. So I'm going to keep going until the active cell is blank, so I'm not going to say there. I also have to check to see, or the active cell active cell dot, this is going to be dot offset of 1, 0 dot value is equal to blank. You see, I'm looking for both of these, you see. I'm going to keep going as long as the active cell is blank and, actually, or it should be and the active cell of the next value. So they both have to be blank. So I'm going to keep looping until they're both blank. The active cell is blank, which is going to be this one here. But then if this one's blank, I don't want to stop as long as this one's blank, the active cell, and the next one's blank. And this is, like I said, if you feel that, oh, what if there's two blanks together, then you can put another and put it on that way, okay? So down here we can do our loop. Did I spell that wrong or something? I did, U-N-T. Spell it wrong. Okay, so there's our looping. So we're going to loop through that. Now, what are we going to do when we get there? What kind of things we're looking for? Well, we're saying that if the active cell is blank, if it's both blank, then we're at the end. Stop. Okay, it's going to stop out here. At this point, we can say that if the active cell dot value is equal to double quote like this, then we already determined if there's two there, then we're into cell. Now we're going to say, well, if the active cell is blank, then we want to delete the active cell, right? So how are we going to delete it? Maybe we can say active cell row dot delete, okay? So active cell dot row dot delete. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, but like I said, this is the idea of what we're looking for. So I'm kind of taking you through this little troubleshooting thing. I don't know if this is going to work, but it might work. But we know that the active cell is a row. So what is this active cell row thing for? So let's find out what number it gives me, what it gives me when it does this active cell row. So one thing we could do is we can put this into a message box, and we're going to see if this gives us any result here. So I'm going to run my program. Like it doesn't like this one, does it? So it doesn't like this code at all. So that's not going to work. So it looks like we can't put this in. We could say active cell row select or something like that, and then maybe delete selection. Try that. So we active cell row. Actually, I think we might have to use a different command here, but I'm going to try to think through this a little bit. Any thoughts, any ideas, any suggestions? Let's go back to here, and let's look at some of these codes. This is kind of what I would expect you to do, just go back and kind of see if you can find some of the answers in some of these related items. Let's go back to our delete here. See, the delete will actually, here's the clear. I want to do the delete here. See, the delete, I specified a certain range delete. See it? But if I have a command here, like the row delete or something like that, there's a rows command and a row command. Let's come back to, so we know what the delete is going to do. We just have to find the right combination here. So this is the active cell row. So there's a command that we could use. Let's come down here and see this one here is a range B to C, select, and here's an entire row. Okay, so here it is. It's the range name here, dot entire row dot select. There we go right there. And there it is right there. See it? We can put this directly in there. So that's exactly what we're looking for, right? So we're going to actually say, put the active cell right here, and then we're going to simply say the entire column and then we want to delete that, or not column, but we want to say row in this particular case, right? Okay, so let's take a look. All right. So this is what we want. So I'll just copy that and come down and apply that to my code here. So here is my with pivot, and so we're going to use something like this. I don't need this anymore. So this is the one that worked. This is the code that worked. So we can replace this active cell here with this, that. So we should be able to get that to work. And so we're going to say wherever the active cell is, delete the entire column. No, column, should be row. And I'm not sure, I didn't see a row in my sheet there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like this, control space bar, and see there's an active column and there's an entire row. So we're going to use the entire row. So we're using dot delete. Okay, so that looks like it's going to do what I'm looking for. And then we have the end if. And so I hope you kind of see what I'm doing in terms of just sort of walking you through this without really having all the answers myself, sort of troubleshooting through this, thinking through this a little bit as together. And I think that's important for you to see that. Okay, now here we have our active cell. We're going to go through these. If it encounters a blank, then delete that row. Otherwise, drop out of it. And then we want to do what? We want to go to the next cell. So we would have to do a active cell. Interesting is, the concern I have here is that if you delete the row, and then you go to the next cell, then you're not processing this one. See? If I delete this one and this one pops up there, then I'm actually going to go to this one, not to this one. So I'm not going to look at each one at a time. So that's my concern. So this active cell offset needs to be up in here. So we say that this is what I want to do. Maybe another if statement that says that, let me see. Somehow we want to, once we delete the row, we want to actually go to the active cell, right? We don't want to move at all. We just want to stay where we are because we don't want to move. So the else, the end if, so if this is a counter, then we want to do this. Then here we would say, let's simply say, else if, else, we want to do our, we want to offset by 1. Okay. Active cell, offset, 1, 0, dot select. Follow me on that little twist there, because what I'm saying is that if we delete this row, then this cell is now going to be 7. And if I say go to the next one, it's actually going to go down to Fred Edwards. Let's just run through it and see what we can do here. We can maybe close it out and try it again. Let's go through and start at A5. And the problem, this is rather damaging, is that it does delete this. And then offset 1, so I got to make sure it's kind of working. So you definitely want to make a copy of this. What we could do is we could come over here and click on cells, hold the control key down, and drag cells to the right like this. We'll make a few copies of it, so that if we do mess it up, we can go back and have a fresh system, a fresh page again. All right, so I'm going to run through it and see if I can't get this to work. So I'm going to run my F8. So now it's going to go to A5. It's there now. Now it's going to go back and says if it's blank, it's not blank. So it's going to go down and jump over it. See it? But I want to go down to the next cell. So it's going to go down the next cell. Now we're in the right cell. Now it's going to loop back. Okay, now it says, is this blank and is the next one blank? Well, they're not both blank, so it's going to run it. And it says, okay, it's not blank, so then jump over this deletion thing and come down here. Now it's drop down one. Now this one's blank. So they're not both blank. That one and the next one's not blank. So we're going to go back and it says, okay, oh, it is blank, so therefore we want to delete that whole row. Now this is the one that's going to see where it's going to work. And we're in it delete this, yeah? So then we're going to say, okay, it just dropped out and we're on the active cell now. See it? John is the active cell. So we want to actually evaluate John. So we're going through and evaluating John right now. I guess it would have worked either way, you know what I mean? But this is a little cleaner, I think. We're going to go through this a little bit more. Okay. Okay, now we're down to another active cell. Okay, goes to the next one. Now we've encountered a space. It should delete this row. Did. Okay, so I'll run through it a couple more times. Down to John Carpenter. And now John Carpenter is going to go down one, and that's blank. Deleted it. Now we're going to go down to the next blank. There, now we're in the next blank. And now it's going to, it's not, two of them are blank, so we're going to go through it. It did encounter a blank here, so therefore delete the row, and there it is. We're going to keep going until we come to the bottom down here. Now we have a situation where it is on the new cell, so the current cell is blank and the next cell is blank. Now, if you want to do 3 or 4 or 5, maybe you can do that, but now it should drop out of the do right now. And it did. Okay? So, I mean, it's going to take a little trial and error to get some of these things to work, but just try to kind of work through it and try to make the little adjustments you need to make these loops work. So there's a little do loop for you, a little example for that.